Hello, my name is Dakota. When I was 7, my mother took me on a picnic, just the two of us. She packed my favorite juice box, told me she loved me, wheeled me to the edge of a cliff, and left me there. They all thought I died. She even raised a statue for the daughter she discarded. 16 years later, I returned, not screaming, not raging, but carrying a painting and a voice she thought she had buried forever. Do you know what it feels like to be erased by your own blood, then rise before them while the whole world watches? I do. Let me show you. Even as a child, I sensed something fractured between me and my mother. Still, that morning I ignored the unease. The sun had barely brushed the rooftops of our Sacramento street when I heard her heels clicking across the hardwood, a tune spilling softly from her lips. She was humming. Claudine never hummed. She didn't do tender, didn't do casual. Everything about her was sharp edges and polished perfection, so much so that my small hands would sweat just standing near her. Yet that morning, she set a basket on the counter, folded a gingham cloth with care, and tucked it neatly over the Tupperware inside. She moved like someone who had practiced the gesture 100 times. In truth, I had never seen her do it once. "Mommy?" I asked, slowly wheeling into the kitchen, for the first time in weeks. Her eyes didn't roll, didn't glance past me. "Morning, baby," she said, her smile tender enough to sting. "We're going on a picnic, just you and me, just you and me." At 7, I took those words as a promise, not a warning. My fingers twitched against the armrest of my chair. I'd spent my life learning to read her tone, how it changed depending on who was watching. But this morning, it was only us. No neighbors, no campaign aides, no buzzing phone, just her and me. And I believed her. The drive was quiet. For once, her phone stayed face down. One hand gripped the wheel, the other rested lightly on the gearshift, her manicured nails tapping in time with the soft jazz flowing from the radio. The sunlight cut across her cheekbones, painting her like something untouchable, immortal. I kept my chatter small, measured. I knew too much of my voice grated on her, that my joy always spilled louder than she could bear. But that day, the silence felt too heavy. I couldn't stop myself. "This is nice," I said, clutching my crayons in my lap. "I like the way the trees sound when we drive past them." She didn't glance at me, just nodded, her voice low. "Just you and me, baby." We drove for more than an hour, weaving through back roads swallowed by towering pines. I didn't recognize where we were, and she didn't explain. I didn't ask. Instead, I sat quietly, memorizing the way her perfume mixed with the cool breath of the forest drifting in through the cracked window. When we finally stopped, it was at an overlook carved into the mountain. The view stretched wide and terrible, an abrupt cliff dropping into a gorge so deep the treetops below looked like moss. Somewhere far beneath, a river whispered against the rocks. A rusted guardrail leaned at the edge, tangled in vines, as though the forest had been slowly trying to pull it back. She got out first. I felt the car dip as she moved around to my side. Her hands, strong and unyielding, lifted me from the seat and set me gently into my wheelchair. Then she gathered the picnic basket, the blanket, my crayons. Together we rolled forward, her heels crunching against the gravel until she stopped just shy of the drop. "Here's a good spot," she said. She unfolded the blanket with careful precision, arranged the food, and slid a straw into my juice box. Everything was too deliberate, too practiced, like she was performing kindness rather than offering it. But I smiled anyway. "This is the nicest thing you've ever done for me, Mommy," I whispered, afraid that speaking might shatter the fragile moment. She froze. I saw it, just for a second, a flicker across her face, like a curtain twitching. Her hands adjusted the basket, fumbling in a way that didn't belong to her. She wouldn't look at me. Instead, her eyes roamed the tree line, the horizon, anywhere but my face. Then, slowly, she rose to her full height and stepped behind me. "You know," she said, her voice calm, steady, "sometimes we have to make hard choices, grown-up choices." I turned, craning in my chair to meet her eyes. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer. Her fingers curled around the handles of my wheelchair. "Mommy," my voice cracked. She leaned closer, so close her breath brushed my ear, and in a whisper softer than the river below, she said, "I have to let go. By the way, Elmer's bones always ached more when it rained. Time didn't pass in days or weeks, it passed in sketches. I drew everything, not because I was good at it, but because it kept my hands busy, because it kept the memories from flooding the room." One winter, the wheel on my chair snapped. Elmer didn't curse, didn't scold, he just pulled out his tools and fixed it, steady and sure, like it was any other thing worth saving. "No use throwing away something that still works," he said. I knew he wasn't talking about the chair. No one remembered me, but I was beginning to remember myself. At night I dreamed in color, bright reds, deep blues, the yellow of a juice box. Other nights I dreamed in silence, my own voice echoing into nothing. I'd wake up gasping, but never screaming. One evening, after dinner, beans, potatoes, and half a biscuit, we sat on the porch, watching the last thread of sunlight sink behind the trees. Elmer lit his pipe, drew once, and asked, "You ever think about going back?" I hesitated. "Back where?" He didn't look at me, just exhaled smoke into the cooling air. "Wherever you came from." I shook my head. "Not really." He didn't press, but the question stuck to me like ash. Later that night, sketching two figures on a porch, I found myself asking, "What if someone forgets to come back for you?" Elmer sat very still. Then, in a voice so even it almost disappeared into the crackle of the fire, he said, "Then maybe they were never meant to stay." The words hit harder than I expected, not cruel, not bitter, just true. That night, I slid the drawing beneath my mattress and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere out there, my mother had buried me in a lie. Maybe it was easier for her than facing the truth. Maybe pretending I was dead gave her the freedom she thought I stole. But here, in this cabin, in the hush of the woods, the warmth of the fire, the scratch of pencil on paper, I wasn't dead. I just didn't have a name anymore. And for the first time, I was starting to be okay with that. I hesitated. "Back where?" Elmer didn't look at me, he just blew out smoke and said, "Wherever you came from." I shook my head. "Not really." He didn't press, but the question clung to me like smoke in the rafters. Later that night, sketching two figures on a porch, I caught myself asking, "What if someone forgets to come back for you?" Elmer sat still for so long I thought he hadn't heard me. Then, quietly, he said, "Then maybe they were never meant to stay." The words sank deep. They weren't cruel, they weren't bitter, they were simply true. That night, I slid the drawing under my mattress and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere out there, my mother had buried me in a lie. Maybe it was easier for her than facing the truth. Maybe pretending I was dead gave her the freedom she thought I stole. But here, in this cabin, wrapped in firelight, the hush of the woods, the scratch of pencil on paper, I wasn't dead. I just didn't have a name anymore, and for the first time, I was learning to be okay with that. For years, the cabin was my whole world, wood and silence, no past, no noise, just the creak of floorboards, the sigh of wind through the pines, and the slow rhythm of Elmer's breath, steady as a man who'd already buried more than he could name. I never asked for more. For the longest time, I didn't want it. But time wears down even the thickest walls. It was late spring, just after the thaw. Elmer's knees had been giving him trouble, bad enough that he finally let a boy from town start bringing supplies once a week. His name was Mason, young, maybe 20, the kind who didn't ask questions, because he didn't want any pointed back at him. He brought coffee, canned food, matches, gas for the generator, and one day, an old television, boxy, beaten, its corners scuffed like it had survived bar fights. "Thrift shop," he said, wiping the dust with his sleeve, "still works if you smack it right." I didn't thank him, but I didn't stop him plugging it in either. At first, I ignored it. I doubted the antenna could catch anything this far out, but sometimes, when Elmer's knees hurt too much for chopping wood, he'd switch it on, static first, then the signal snapping into shape, a weather update, an old western, a rerun of some soap. Most days, I pretended not to listen, but something in me, something small and hungry, kept leaning closer. One afternoon, Elmer had dozed off in his chair. I sat near the window, sketching a willow tree from memory. The stew I'd simmered for him filled the cabin with the smell of onion and cedar smoke. The television murmured in the corner, background noise I barely noticed. Until I heard her name. Claudine Jameson, local philanthropist and candidate for mayor of Sacramento. The pencil snapped in my hand. I froze, staring at the screen as if it had struck me. There she was, my mother. Older now, but still flawless in that polished, untouchable way, hair set perfectly, eyes shining just enough to suggest grief without smudging her mascara. A black dress hugged her frame, refined, deliberate, and beside her, a man with a face I almost recognized. A mother who lost her daughter in a tragic accident, the reporter intoned, and found purpose through pain. I couldn't breathe. Clips rolled of her campaign rallies, shaking hands, holding children, her husband's arm cinched around her waist like a seal of approval. The voiceover praised her transformation, how grief became advocacy, how she now served on the governor's advisory board for family welfare, how she had dedicated her career to ensuring no mother suffers like I did. My grip on the wheelchair's armrest tightened until the skin pinched white. And then I saw him again, the man beside her, now her husband. I remembered the late-night visits, my mother telling me to stay in my room, the voice, once muffled behind a closed door, harsh and impatient. "You want me to marry a woman dragging around a crippled kid?" At 7, the words hadn't made sense. At 23, they sliced through me like ice water. So that was the deal. Trade the kid for the ring. I hadn't set foot in Sacramento in 16 years, even as the gallery van rolled past the city limits. My palms grew damp against my lap. Back at the cabin, I had memorized every crack in the floorboards, every way Elmer stirred his coffee, every rhythm of our quiet days. But nothing had prepared me for this, the feeling of returning to the city that had wrapped my disappearance in the costume of grief. The exhibit was called Voices Unseen, fitting. The gallery wasn't grand, just a brickfront space tucked between a boutique hotel and a chain cafe downtown. Exposed brick, tall windows, soft amber lights, clean, curated, safe enough to look, dangerous enough to feel. I had told them I'd arrive quietly, no introductions, no announcements, no press release to soften the truth. I wanted them to meet the work before they met me. I wheeled in around 6:30, as the crowd began to swell. Elmer had driven me, but he stayed outside, leaning against the van like a man waiting on his tires. "You sure you don't want me in there?" he asked. I shook my head. "I have to do this alone." His hand found my shoulder, steady, grounding. "Then let them see what they've been pretending not to." Inside, the walls were lined with canvases, portraits of absence, fragments of families, silence painted in colors that didn't quite speak. And at the far corner, my piece, the centerpiece, draped in a charcoal cloth, set apart from the rest. The plaque beneath it read only, "Untitled, Anonymous Submission." People were already circling it, their voices low, sharp with speculation. "She's supposed to be here tonight," a woman whispered over the rim of her wine glass. "The artist, do you think it's about someone real?" Another voice, "I heard it's political, something about a mayoral candidate's wife." A third, "Look at the hand behind the chair, that's not guidance, that's possession, intent." I lingered in the shadows, listening, my chest tightened not from fear, but from the weight of being seen without a name, of being recognized in shapes and colors before anyone dared to say me. Across town, in a ballroom draped with red carpet and gold-trimmed columns, Claudine was stepping onto another stage, her campaign gala, the final push before election night. Every camera swiveled toward her as she crossed the polished floor. Her navy dress was deliberate, timeless. Her heels struck the silence like punctuation. Behind her loomed the statue, the monument I never asked for, bronze, lifeless, a 7-year-old me, forever in the chair I never outgrew, forever tilting my gaze toward a sky she never let me reach. Applause swelled as she reached the podium. "I'm a mother," she began, pausing with practiced gravity, but more than that, I'm proof that pain doesn't have to end us, it can become the reason we rise. The line gleamed, polished by rehearsal, sharpened by mirrors, the cameras caught the glint in her eye. Back at the gallery, the curator approached. Miss, she said gently, not recognizing me, it's time. I wheeled toward the veiled painting, hands trembling, not with nerves, but with something older, deeper. I thought of the cabin, of Elmer's quiet steadiness, of the root I'd clung to when the river tried to pull me under. I took hold of the cloth and pulled. Silence fell. The reveal wasn't violent, it didn't scream, it spoke in a voice sharper than sound. On the canvas, a faceless woman in a tailored suit and red heels, her hand pressed against the back of a wheelchair, and the child, me, at the cliff's edge, suspended between earth and air, fingers just beginning to slip. The crowd froze. For a breath, they didn't understand. Then one voice, clear and certain. That's Claudine Jameson. Others pressed closer. It's her. It's definitely her. Phones lifted. Flashes sparked. The hush broke into a storm.